Good evening. Tonight we're going to be talking about HDL. So I get this question a lot on social media and in my office about HDL. And HDL is a complicated topic, I'm not going to lie. You know, I spent 20 years as a physician, 10 years as a cardiologist, and I don't fully understand HDL. And HDL is a lot more complicated than high HDL is good and low HDL is bad. You know, if you've heard me talk on my previous lipid talks, I talk about cholesterol is just cholesterol. There's no such thing as good cholesterol. There's no such thing as bad cholesterol. But cholesterol is a waxy compound that cannot float in the liquid blood. So a lipoprotein has to transport the cholesterol through the system. You know, there's HDL particles and there's LDL particles. So we've done talks on Apo B before, and I'm going to talk tonight more on the HDL side, but they're both important. So think of a lipoprotein, a lipid protein carrier. It's a cargo ship. There's going to be cholesterol inside, triglycerides, phospholipids, and different proteins. HDL, you know, one of the analogies is it's like a fire truck, you know, but it has like 200 to 300 different types of fire trucks. HDL is more complicated. There's different proteins that sit on the outside of it, which determines its function. So people want to make things simple and say that, like, well, you have high HDL, well, your arteries are going to be very clean and you're heart attack proof. And it's not that simple. HDL has 200 or more, you know, functions in the body. You know, one of them is it's a part of the innate immune system. It helps the immune system go fight an infection. So if you have different proteins on the outside of the HDL particle, it does different things. There's different sizes of HDL. You know, there's small baby HDLs and there's large HDLs. They're larger because they're carrying more cholesterol in them. So an HDL-C on your traditional lipid panel, you know, by normal guidelines, they're going to say less than 40 milligrams per deciliter in a man is, quote, low. Less than 50 milligrams per deciliter in a woman is, quote, low. But having a number of an HDL-C really tells you nothing what's going on in the system. It's a snapshot in time. What you would really need to have is a video camera inside the arteries and see where are these HDL particles actually going? What is the flux of these HDLs? So we'll hit a couple of the functions of HDL tonight. We'll talk about some of the testing people consider getting done, but I'm going to tell you that, like, in one Instagram live, I'm not going to get to the bottom of all your questions on HDL. It's extremely complicated, but wanted to mostly at least tell you, like, you know, don't base your whole decision on if your arteries are healthy is if you have a high HDL cholesterol on a traditional panel, because it's more complicated. You know, side note on is that traditional lipid panel, unless you have like familial hyperlipidemia, really shouldn't be used much at all to determine your risk. Think of your traditional cholesterol panel as something where they take your blood, they spin it really, really fast in a test tube, and then they look at where things layer out. The high densities are going to be at the bottom because they're not that full of cholesterol. So there's more proteins in them. It's heavier, so it goes to the bottom, it sinks to the bottom. That really doesn't tell you, again, where that HDL goes in your body. So a better metric would be to look at your HDL particle count. You know, these are the cargo ships. So the HDL cholesterol is inside, the triglycerides, the phospholipids, and the proteins on the outside. You know, like I said, there's up to 200 of those proteins. They're going through the system. A couple of HDL's jobs, one I talked about was the innate immune system. It's dropping off things for the immune system to go fight infections. You know, but what people get mostly interested in, you know, the cardiovascular world is its ability to do reverse cholesterol transporter, RCT. Now, it's not exactly this simple as that, you know, the Apo B particles drop the cholesterol off in the artery and then the HDL particles go there and try to get the cholesterol out. It happens a little bit that way, but, you know, that is the macrophages that are like making the foam cells, and the HDLs can go there and basically delipidate those plaques. They put like a little straw out and they suck the cholesterol into the HDL particle. Then that can get out of the artery wall, and then it goes back to the liver to drop off the payload to the liver for the most part. But HDL's main job is to accept cholesterol from cells that don't want it or need it. High levels of cholesterol inside the cells is toxic to the cells. So HDL is, you know, one of its jobs is being like a garbage truck going around the cells looking to be an acceptor of cholesterol. When I earlier said there's no such thing as good cholesterol, there's no such thing as bad cholesterol, many people will be kind of shocked that the majority of the cholesterol inside your LDLs actually came from your HDLs. The HDLs and the LDLs made up, and basically the HDL accepts the cholesterol from the LDL and gives the LDL triglycerides. And I'm sorry, back around, the HDL actually gives the LDL the cholesterol, and the LDL takes it back to the liver and indirectly reverse cholesterol transports it to the liver to get it out of circulation. So again, it's very complicated. The HDL is influenced definitely by your genetics. There are genes that you can assess that can determine if you're going to have likely high levels of HDL-C or likely low levels of HDL-C, but they don't determine if they function well in you. I recently saw a patient last week who had a gene that had an abnormality in the ATP Binding Cassette. This person's HDL-C was less than 9. It was literally the lowest HDL-C I'd ever seen in my career in 20 years. But this person had mild atherosclerosis on their imaging testing. So the strategy was to lower the Apo B so there's less likely damage going on in the arteries, so HDL didn't have as much of a job to do trying to go clean up the mess. But there's also a gene called SCARB, SCARB1. It's a gene that influences an enzyme that affects a receptor on the liver to pull out the HDL particles from circulation. So if you don't have, the SCARB gene that works functionally, you can, I'm going to get this probably messed up in my brain a little bit, but your HDL numbers will probably be low because you're not necessarily able to get them out of circulation very well. So the genetics play a role, as you would expect, but it's epigenetics. Yes, I'm always going to encourage people to live a healthy lifestyle, exercise, resistance training, cardiorespiratory fitness training. Eating a relatively well-balanced whole food diet. Avoiding trans fats. Eating omega-3s been definitely shown to raise your HDL concentrations. But the data on trying to raise your HDL through anything other than lifestyle is not that great. There's companies that spent millions upon almost billions of dollars probably trying to raise HDL pharmacologically. These were the CTEP inhibitors. This was very popular when I was finishing up my cardiovascular training back in 2012. There was at least 4 of these drugs that were trying to hit the market. One of the drugs actually increased the risk of heart attacks and strokes because it had an off-target effect of raising blood pressure. The other ones really didn't affect blood pressure, and they would raise HDL-C. Some of them raised it 133%, but clinically these people didn't do any better. So raising HDL through pharmacological means really doesn't benefit the person that well. Often get the question about niacin. Yes, niacin, one of the B vitamins, can raise HDL, but tends to raise the HDL-C, not really the HDL particles much, or it's raising the large HDL particles instead of the small HDL particles. So again, it gets very complicated. So niacin may raise your HDL, but clinically, does that make a difference? In HPS Thrive, NAME-HIGH trials really didn't show that the patients did that much better taking niacin. So I'm not opposed to people taking, if you have high triglycerides, there's other reasons to be on niacin, but taking niacin just to raise your HDL cholesterol really is not likely to benefit you much. Again, it really comes down to the function of the HDL. What is the HDL doing as it's circulating around in your arteries? Most of your cells are making its own supply of cholesterol. The adrenals at times, when they're under more stress, the HDL will go to the adrenals and drop off some cholesterol there, but you don't know otherwise where is the HDL going in the system. So until we invent that kind of lab technology or imaging testing to look at the flux of where the HDL particles are going, you have to kind of infer, well, what's going on with the arteries. And so you've heard me talk about 60,000 miles of blood vessels. The arteries should be elastic, they should be very springy. Testing like the max pulse, testing like the endopac can tell you, do you have healthy nitric oxide levels? If you do, you have healthy arteries, well, you don't tend to have a lot of inflammation, a lot of oxidative stress. So HDL really isn't going to have much of a role to try to, quote, clean up the arteries. It can go do its other, 200 duties. But if you have a lot of inflammation and oxidation, that's where the HDL becomes likely dysfunctional. There's a lab test you can get assessed called myeloperoxidase, or MPO. M as in Mike, P-O. That myeloperoxidase oxidizes the phospholipids on the outside of HDL. It oxidizes the Apo A1 lipoprotein. So if it's oxidized, Now the HDL doesn't work. It actually becomes pro-inflammatory. The HDLs can get taken up in the foam cells and actually increase the plaque in your arteries. It's like a dump truck with toxic waste in it that is now stuck in your arteries. So these people, because their HDL is getting damaged by oxidation, their liver will start cranking out more and more HDL particles. If the inflammation and oxidation are still occurring, these ones are getting damaged. So you can have a high HDL-C on your traditional blood testing. Your level can be greater than 70. That's usually the cutoff that, if your HDL-C is over 70, you want to make sure that you don't have a lot of oxidation or inflammation that is causing that level to be high. In the past, people would say, oh, you have a high HDL-C, you're heart attack proof. There's nothing bad going on in your arteries. But if you have a high myeloperoxidase, or if you use some of the other inflammatory markers, high sensitivity CRP, LPPLA2, there's one test called F2-isoprostatic creatinine. It's an oxidative stress marker. If those things are elevated, that HDL is likely not working at full capacity. So this is what I'm going to share with you guys tonight, that HDL-C being high isn't always cardioprotective, and having low HDL-C doesn't mean that you're destined to have a heart attack. It really depends on, do you have healthy endothelial function, optimal nitric oxide levels inside the artery walls, do you have low levels of inflammation, oxidative stress, and then it's more on the Apo B side of things, the LDL particle side. It's the Apo Bs that really drive atherosclerosis risk. So lowering the Apo B count down to whatever you need it to be, but potentially less than 60, decreases the risk of plaque formation in the arteries. Then the HDL particles don't have to do as much work. So recapping, HDL, complicated topic. Tonight was mostly the intro. If you have some questions, I will answer them, and people are really interested. Maybe we'll go deeper dive into some of the HDL, pharmacologic agents that have been tried in the past. If you really want to know the data on them, we can pull up all the old trials, AIM High, HPS Thrive, and then all the CTEP inhibitors. We can do that. But to recap, check the inflammatory markers, check oxidative stress markers, check Apo B, and then look at the markers that look at how healthy the arteries are, the max pulse, the endopat, the carotid intima-medial thickness test ultrasound, the CT coronary calcium score, or the Cleerly CCTA, the CT coronary angiogram. If you have healthy arteries, maybe it's not going to matter as much what your HDL-C is. It definitely doesn't. But if you have advanced atherosclerosis, there's other things you need to be focusing on than worrying about your HDL-C per se. I will look at it. I'm always going to talk about it in the office, but I want you to focus more on the Apo B, the inflammation, the oxidation, and what's actually going on in your arteries. All right, guys. So waiting for any questions to come in, and I'll answer them. But a couple things. One, next week, Monday, 6 p.m. Central Time, on the 1st of the month, generally do an Ask Me Anything, so we'll do the October version. I'll do something different that I hadn't been doing before. You may have saw it before this video. Answer 2 questions from the other week. I threw up kind of a poll saying, what else do you want to see about my stories? I'll start trying to do answer a question of the day, but on the first Monday of the month, just open it up to anybody's questions live, or submit it ahead of time, and I'll just punch them out one by one. Second thing I wanted to add was that I'm having a retreat down in Cancun in December. The dates are December 1st through the 4th. It's going to be at the JW Marriott. It's one of my favorite hotels in the world. Excellent service, excellent beach, great place to soak up some sun for the people in the Northern Hemisphere. It's my annual sun run in November, December to, charge up the mitochondria and get yourself through the dark winters of St. Louis. So if you're potentially interested in attending that event, send me a message. I can add you to my email list. There's going to be an update going out on October 1st with more details on it. All right. So somebody is asking a question. Are statins overprescribed? Depends. It's an N of 1 type of situation. So, statins should not be in the water for everybody, and statins aren't complete poison. Statins are tools, and use the right tool for the right job. So if you have an Apo B that's excessively high, and you have advanced atherosclerosis in your arteries, seen on a carotid intima-medial thickness test, a calcium score, a Cleerly scan, or you've already had a stents bypass, statins are good tools at helping slow down that progression. But there's other things that you can consider doing if statins don't agree with you, or you prefer not to be on statins, but it is an N of 1. You have to know what's going on with their arteries before you can say, is it the right tool for that person? All right, so question, a little bit off topic, but useful, is a supplement called Arterosil. Arterosil is a supplement, it's a proprietary product that helps regenerate the endothelial glycocalyx. The endothelial glycocalyx, or glycocalyx for short, is the gel coat that lines the artery walls. You have the 60,000 miles of blood vessels, and coating the arteries is something called the endothelium. It's 1 cell thick, but sitting on top of that is this gel coat, this glycocalyx. The glycocalyx, when it gets damaged from inflammation and infection, high blood sugar, hundreds of different things can damage this gel coat, the artery will not secrete as much nitric oxide, and then things will start sticking to the artery walls. White blood cells, the Apo B lipoproteins stick to the walls, and plaque formation can begin. Arterosil donates sulfur units, this rhamnol sulfate, to the glycocalyx. So think of it like a cotton candy consistency, or the other week I took a picture on a riverbed and you see the little moss or seagrass at the bottom floating there. It's basically trying to regrow that seagrass, and that's what Arterosil does. It helps support the endothelial glycocalyx. And somebody's asking about a particular type of mouthwash. I haven't heard of this particular one, but on the recent podcast I did with Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, I talked about mouthwash can have an effect on the nitrite reducing bacteria in your saliva. Those bacteria are responsible for breaking down nitrites and nitrates that are found in your foodstuffs, mainly the green leafy vegetables and beets. If you don't have that bacteria, you can't make that conversion happen, and it's going to potentially lead to lower nitric oxide levels in you. So it's unknown, which mouthwashes are definitely going to affect that oral microbiome. So if people really want to test, don't guess, there are different companies that make nitrite test strips, salivary nitrite test strips. It's kind of like litmus paper. You put saliva on it. If it stays white, you're low levels of nitrites in your saliva. If the strip turns red, you have high levels of nitrites in your saliva. You want to be high. So you can try to use whatever mouthwash you're using, test your saliva first thing in the morning, and if it's white, the mouthwash is probably having an effect on those bacteria. All right. And then somebody's asking about, is there a range like to see Apo B? For sure, but it does depend on the health of the arteries. If you have documented plaque in the arteries, I generally see that Apo B number, sub 60, being the less than the 5th percentile of all the population. That is really where the number needs to generally get to if you want to have any significant plaque regression. So I often get that question too, is, once plaque's in the arteries, is it able to shrink down or get better? Yes, but typically if your Apo B is in the 90s, 100 range, you might be able to halt things, but you're not likely to get things to regress. It's too many shots on goal. There's still likely things getting through and your body's having to deal with it, so you're probably adding to plaque at higher levels of Apo B. All right, and so somebody's asking about artichoke leaf extract. I don't really know what the benefit of it would be. I've not personally taken it or recommended it. Not opposed to people eating artichokes, they tend to be delicious, but especially if they're soaked in butter, but I haven't recommended the supplement to anybody. And just a side note, I don't recommend a lot of supplementation to people. Supplements are for deficiencies, and especially if you can't get it through your environment, your foodstuffs, then that's when you want to supplement things. All right, guys. Well, I hit you with the HDL story tonight. I'll add a little descriptor in my stories and in the comments. There's going to be a link to an article that really goes deep into the science if you're one of those science geeks that wants to know all about SCARB and the ATP binding cassettes and CTEP inhibitors and such. I'll link into that story. And then next week, Monday, 6 p.m., it'll be an Ask Me Anything. I'll put up in my poll the day before or so if you want to put questions ahead of time, or log on like this and I'll answer questions like some of you guys asked tonight. So we'll see you next Monday night. So have a great week.